to A Neighbor's Choice Radio. I'm your host, David Gornoski, and we're joined by my friend Tucker Goodrich, who returns to the program to give us some nutritional research and ideas that he's been looking into. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing really well. How are you, David? It's a pleasure to be with you, as always, and with all of your listeners.
Yeah, it's great having you back. And you were telling me that you've been researching diabetes a lot this week. What's the occasion for your research of that?
Well, the occasion is my work for Zero Acre Farms, who we've discussed and in the past. And one of the things they're doing, which I think is really great, is they're trying to educate people about the health problems with seed oils. And this is what makes that company different from every other company that is trying to get rid of seed oils from our food supply. And that is that Zero Acre, because they don't sell any seed oils, can be honest about why they're doing what they're doing. So part of that is trying to explain to people and get the word out about the many different ways in which seed oils are related to, and I think cause, our epidemic, or pandemic, let's use that word, of chronic disease. And diabetes is the topic I'm working on at the moment. Prior to this, it was heart disease. Now I've moved on to diabetes.
And so your research has led you to conclude, again, based on previous conversations, that what is the driving force behind this type 2 diabetes for people?
Yeah, so we have this, worldwide pandemic of type 2 diabetes that started fairly recently in the last few decades. We went from, when I was a kid growing up, type 2 diabetes was known as adult onset diabetes, right? Type 1 diabetes was known as early onset or child onset diabetes. Well, then kids started coming down with type 2 diabetes. And like all of these chronic diseases, as time goes on, the age at which people are getting them is getting earlier and earlier. So when I came down with diverticulitis, which is another one of these chronic diseases, that's typically a disease of people in their 80s. And yet I got it right after my 40th birthday. And it turns out that people are getting it earlier and earlier. That's happening with all these diseases. And this is all correlated with our increased intake of...
Looks like we lost Tucker. Let's see if we can get him back on. Right there at a very dramatic moment. I think I have an idea as to what the increase of food he may have been suggesting. I have a big suspicion it might have to do with seed oils. These vegetable oils that we've talked about with Tucker include things like soybean oil, safflower, corn oil, things like all
David,
these.
I'm back.
There you are. Got you there. Lost you for a second.
Sorry, little technology problem.
Yeah, so you were saying that there a rise in what? The seed oils are connected to the rise of type 2 diabetes?
Type 2 diabetes and all the other chronic diseases, and then as we eat more and more of them, they're happening to us younger and younger. And this was something that was noticed even, 70 years ago when a cardiologist wrote a paper saying, hey, turns out I've got a bunch of patients where the father got a heart attack and the son got a heart attack, but the son got the heart attack 20 years younger than the father got the heart attack. So why is this disease that used to be rare suddenly become common and now happening to us at younger and younger ages? So type 2 diabetes, they had to change the name because it's not adult onset diabetes anymore. Now it's very common in children. And, it's obviously a huge problem, just like obesity, which used to be rare in children, when I was growing up. And, I go back and I look at my high school graduation photo, and the guys who we thought were heavy don't look overweight anymore. And compared to, you go out and walk around and, almost everybody's overweight now. It's become an enormous problem. So diabetes is what I'm working on right now. It's, I think, something where probably more than anything else, if you want to induce insulin resistance, which is a key signature feature of diabetes, in a laboratory experiment with humans, you do it by injecting soybean oil into them. Right. And if you don't use soybean oil, if you use another kind of oil that doesn't include the high amount of omega-6 fats, it doesn't seem to work. So, and we have Yale University just did a study where they reduced the omega-6 content of the diet of a bunch of kids who had insulin resistance and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and it got better. So this is something where I think we have, although it's not widely recognized yet, this is something where I think we have an open and shut case that this is the problem and this is the fix.
I see. So how again is the seed oils? Everybody's been told sugar, 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 sugar. Sugar's what causes diabetes. You ate too much sugar. Why are you eating sugar? Sugar, 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 sugar. That's where the rise of diabetes comes from. Everybody just starts eating sugar, 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 and that's why diabetes is at the rate it's at. And how do you not see that as the real issue compared to the vegetable oil acids that people are eating?
Well, it's really easy. I mean, you know, Gary Taubes is the guy who's put that message out through a number of his books, and I think he's done a lot of great work. But when I read his book, I stopped eating sugar when I was in my late teens, right? Because I had really bad dental problems, and my dentist said, hey, kid, you want to stop coming to see me? Stop eating sugar. And finally I listened to him. And he was right. I stopped getting cavities. But I still got sick, and I still got fat, and I still got fatty liver as measured by my liver enzymes, even though for decades I was very carefully watching my sugar consumption. So how does that happen? Well, maybe there's a confounder, right? There's sugar on its, I mean, yes, look, sugar on its own is a problem because it causes dental disease, period, end of story. So as I like to say to people who say sugar's healthy, any food that causes your face to rot isn't healthy. But it doesn't seem to cause diabetes. If you look at populations, when you eat sugar, sugar mostly turns to glucose, right? If you look at foods that turn directly to glucose, like white rice, they don't cause diabetes on their own. They don't cause diabetes until you start eating a lot of seed oils. We saw this in Japan, where carbohydrate consumption went down after World War II, and seed oil consumption went up, and their diabetes rate went up tenfold. We saw it in the United States, where diabetes, you know, in the early part of the 20th century, we ate a lot of carbohydrates and a fair amount of sugar. And, you know, diabetes was a super rare disease, and now it's become a prevalent disease. And the biggest change in our diet in that period has been the increased consumption of seed oils. And, if you want to give, what's really interesting in all the animal experiments, the control is always carbohydrate and sugar. That's what keeps the animals healthy.
Right. That's what keeps them healthy?
That's what keeps them healthy. That's the basic.
But I thought you said sugar causes your teeth to rot. Is it, other people have suggested...
Well, if you're a mouse, you're only going to live for a couple of years anyway, so you don't really have to worry about that.
But is sugar bad or good?
But, yeah. Sugar is bad on its own, and it's far, far, far worse if you're looking at it in the context of a diet high in vegetable oils, high in seed oils.
Let's take a break. We'll unpack more of this when we return with Tucker Goodrich. In the meantime, check out his podcast. Search for Tucker Goodrich on YouTube and subscribe. Debugging Life is the name of his podcast. Also, you go to yelling-stop.blogspot.com for his blog. More after this. to A Neighbor's Choice Radio. I'm your host, David Gornoski, here with Tucker Goodrich, and we're exploring the issue of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and Tucker suggested it's driven by these seed oils. You know, some folks have suggested in the high-carb, high-sugar group online that actually ketosis, this trend towards low-carb diets and ketosis, can also cause you to contribute to diabetes. How could that be? Do you find anything to that?
I don't see any way that ketosis would lead to diabetes. I've spent a lot of time looking into this. Millions and millions of people have gone on ketogenic diets over the last several decades, since Atkins originally wrote his book, and since the protein-sparing modified fasts like OptiFast and MetaFast came out. And I've never seen any evidence that those diets lead to type 2 diabetes. They are the most effective treatments that we have for type 2 diabetes right now.
So do you believe that staying in ketosis long-term is where the best doctors and nutritionists are recommending type 2 diabetics stay? Or is it just about keeping seed oils completely out of your life and just, you don't have to be in ketosis, just do lower carb or moderate carb or whatever at that point? What are they recommending, the doctors that you've heard?
I think the normal state of human existence is to be into and out of ketosis, right? So I think probably the worst thing you can do is what we're told to do now by the medical establishment, which is, eat meals, eat snacks, eat lots of carbohydrates, keep yourself constantly burning sugar on a background of as much vegetable oil as you can stomach. That's pretty much the worst recommendation. And why is that? Because it means you're never burning off your body fat, right? If you're constantly eating sugar, you're constantly producing insulin, which turns down your fat burning. That's not what you want, right? And additionally, you were eating seed oils, which cause your body to store fat and break your metabolism, right? They literally damage your mitochondria and impair your ability to burn off fuel. It makes, Brad Marshall likes to use the phrase torpor, which isn't a bad one to use. So if you want to fix diabetes, then the trick is, A, you can't process carbohydrates, so you need to cut back on carbohydrates. That's the first thing you should do. Seed oils seem to be what leads to type 2 diabetes in the first place, so you need to cut that back. And then it's going to take yourself time to heal your metabolism. I mean, fatty liver disease it's a disease that never existed before the 1980s, which wasn't all that long ago. And what it is a situation where your liver makes a lot of fat and then it's unable to get rid of it, and it becomes fatter and fatter and fatter, and then ultimately it starts getting fibrosis, and then it gets liver cancer, and then now it's become the most common reason to need a liver transplant, right? So it literally kills your liver. And the way we can induce that in humans is by, again, injecting seed oils into them, right? So what you need to do is cut out the thing you can't process anymore, which is glucose, sugar, and then cut out the thing that's causing it, which is the seed oils, and then wait, because the healing takes time. In my case, it took 4 years for my liver enzymes to normalize. And by normalize, you mean within the normal range that those blood tests show for liver enzyme? That's right.
Would you, if, and again, we're not giving medical advice, we're giving your personal opinion, having studied the direct science literature and interact with doctors, but for your personal self, would you avoid farm-raised fish like tilapia and salmon and chicken fat and pork fat just as carefully as seed oils if you had diabetes?
Well, that's a really great point. farm-raised fish are a very different thing from industrially raised chicken and pork. They have a very different fatty acid profile and a much better fatty acid profile. So yes, do I avoid farm-raised pork and farm-raised chicken? Absolutely. Farm-raised fish, if you can, depends on what your options are. If you can afford to do nothing but wild-caught fish, that's the best. If you can't afford that, farm-raised fish is way better than eating industrially raised chicken or pork, and it's got a fatty acid profile that's not too far from what wild-caught fish is.
But diabetics,
and a lot of it depends. Beg your pardon?
But diabetics would be safe to eat, say, lean chicken breast without the skin, right? Under this paradigm,
definitely better than eating a lot of chicken fat. Absolutely.
I'm just saying, they're not going to get that heavy amount of omega-6 if they're eating chicken breast without skin or fat attached to it, right? Or am I wrong?
Well, yeah, they're going to be. I mean, look, muscle always has some fat in it, so you're going to be getting more omega-6 than you would be, say, you're going to be getting more seed oils than if you're eating beef. Ruminants are largely protected from seed oils, not completely, but largely. So that's definitely your best option is ruminants, pigs, beef, lamb, goats. And then after that, along with that, wild-caught fish. And then after that, you're looking at farm-raised fish like salmon. And after that, stuff like catfish and shrimp that's farm-raised, they'll literally eat anything. I haven't really looked into what the fatty acid profiles of that. But
I thought
salmon is the worst thing in the world because
I thought tilapia was really high in omega-6 fats. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, tilapia is another one of the ones that we'll eat. I talked to a scientist today who's the head of a seafood nutrition not-for-profit, Tom Brenna, and his comment was salmon have the good sense to die if you don't feed them enough DHA. So they have even when they're farm raised, they have a much better fatty acid profile than some of the other farm raised fish. And
so would you tell people to avoid starches based on the literature you've seen, potatoes and things like that, or no?
Starches are problematic when you take them on top of a high seed oil diet, right? Because they stimulate the metabolism and they stimulate the oxidation of omega-6 fats into toxins. And fructose.
But if you cut the seed oils out, should diabetics, in your opinion, based on the literature you've read, still probably, in your personal opinion, avoid heavy starches, even without seed oils in the diet?
I would say at least for a few years. I would say when all your enzymes normalize and you're back to healthy, then you can start looking at going on a higher carb diet.
Yeah. What is it about? What are you trying to specifically heal when you do this type of nutritional intervention? You're trying to heal the pancreas. When you become a type 2 diabetic, one of the things that happens is as we've talked about in the past, your LDL oxidizes. Oxidized LDL kills the beta cells that produce insulin, right? This is probably why people who get type 2 diabetes often progress to type 1 diabetes, where they can no longer make enough insulin, right? Type 2 diabetes is a disease of too much insulin. Type 1 diabetes is a disease of too little insulin. Well, why do people go from one to the other? They do that because when you have type 2 diabetes, your blood oxidizes, your LDL in your blood oxidizes, it becomes toxic, and it kills the beta cells in your pancreas, right? Now, can that reverse? We don't really know, right? I mean, it's possible. If you're a full-on type 1 diabetic, you're probably going to be dependent on insulin for the rest of your life, unfortunately. If you're partway through progressing from type 2 to type 1 diabetes and you stop, will it reverse? We really don't know that yet. And there's a lot of other damage that happens in your body from excess consumption of seed oils. I mean, they damage one study I saw looked at said they damage 24% of the proteins in your cells.
So a quarter of the proteins in your cells get damaged by excess seed oil consumption.
How are they
irreversible.
How are they damaging the proteins in your cells when you eat vegetable oils?
The toxins that vegetable oils turn into, like HNE, bind to the proteins and alter the function of the proteins. And that's why a lot of the things that we talk about in these chronic diseases, like, for instance, in cancer cells, they say cancer cells run, Thomas Seyfried, who we talked to, says cancer cells run on glucose. Well, part of the reason they run on glucose is because seed oils damage the protein that moves glucose from the cell into the mitochondria, so the mitochondria can burn it, and the cell is left to basically limp along by burning glucose through a process called glycolysis, which is much less effective. And the cancer cells kind of go rogue at that point. And that's, same thing happens in Alzheimer's disease. In Alzheimer's disease, it's clearly been shown that the enzyme, the protein that moves glucose into the mitochondria to be oxidized most efficiently, is damaged and can no longer convey the glucose into the mitochondria. And then that excess glucose, that's why we also see in cancer cells an increase in lactate, because lactate is what glucose is when it's metabolized via this process called glycolysis. It's turned from glucose into lactate instead of from glucose into carbon dioxide and water, which is what you exhale. So you're breaking fundamental aspects of your metabolism. And in some cases, like in cancer, I don't think you can fix cancer by going on a low seed oil diet. It's too late at that point, unfortunately.
Huh. So that's something that can, eating seed oils can lead to that disease state, but taking them out once you have it doesn't seem to help at all.
I mean, it may help, but I've never heard of anything where it's going to reverse it.
Wow.
For cancer.
Yeah. But for diabetes, getting them out of your life, you think could help people tremendously.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen it myself. I saw it with my father. We fixed his HbA1c in his body in 2 months and got his body weight down in 4 months. The doctor couldn't believe it. I told the doctor at the beginning, I said, diabetes is easy. I'll take care of that.
Well, thanks again, Tucker, for joining me. I really appreciate your time. And again, folks can check out your podcast, Debugging Life, on YouTube. Search for Tucker Goodrich, and you can watch it there for more of his insights. Also go to @TuckerGoodrich on Twitter to see his tweets there. Always a pleasure, sir.
Thank you, David. It's always great.
And, of course, if you want to be in touch with me, you can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.